Travel ban. President Donald Trump's travel ban may soon extend to many more countries under new visa procedures described in a State Department cable to consulates. The new consular guidance, which the State Department sent out Wednesday, follows through on Trump's March 6 executive order, which called for a worldwide review of visa security measures by the Department of Homeland Security. It's unclear whether the cable's strict vetting procedures will eventually supplant the administration's ban on travel from 6 majority Muslim countries, which was intended to be temporary, or whether even more restrictive vetting will be devised for those countries. The Supreme Court on June 26 allowed the travel ban to go forward, with certain restrictions. It will hear arguments on the ban's legality in the fall. The tighter standards for granting visas will be implemented over a 50-day period, according to the cable. If nations do not comply after that time, designated categories of travelers from those countries could be banned from the U.S., the cable said. Among the new requirements are biometric images on passports and for countries to provide the U.S. with additional biographical information about travelers, including criminal records. The new guidance will also require, as a potential condition of accepting visitors from a given country, that the country accept all nationals that the U.S. wishes to deport to that country. The cable asks consular officials to explain the plan to each foreign government, and provides talking points. Underscore that while it is not our goal to impose a ban on immigration benefits, including visas, for citizens of any country, these standards are designed to mitigate risk, and failure to make progress could lead to security measures by the U.S. government, the cable states. A U.S. official familiar with the issue complained that the cable left the impression that the standards are so high that most countries won't meet them. As you see in the cable, it reviews things like how sure governments are that people applying for their passports, and thus our visas, are who they say they are, the official said, adding that it would be hard for countries to do that for every traveler. Leon Fresco, a prominent immigration attorney, said the rules will require countries to create a technological infrastructure that they may not be able to afford, such as a comprehensive database on lost or stolen passports. He said that some countries in the U.S. visa waiver program, which allows travel to the United States without a visa, won't be able to meet all the requirements. But there may be some room to maneuver. The cable directs consulates to tell countries in some instances that instead of taking action, they may start developing a plan to do so. It may come down to case-by-case decisions. They're trying to build in flexibility, but to the extent that they want to keep the ban, they have that flexibility, too, said Fresco, who previously served in the Department of Justice. The State Department said Thursday that security measures frequently evolve, but declined to comment on the cable. The U.S. government's national security screening and vetting procedures for visitors are constantly reviewed and refined to improve security and more effectively identify individuals who could pose a threat to the United States. Justice Department appeals latest travel ban setback to Supreme Court. The Justice Department on Friday appealed to the Supreme Court a federal judge's decision to allow grandparents, grandchildren, aunts, uncles and other relatives of people in the U.S. to circumvent the Trump administration's travel ban policy. The order, issued Thursday evening local time in Honolulu by Judge Derek Watson in Hawaii, deals a temporary blow to one of the president's signature initiatives. It also prohibits the administration from blocking refugees with a commitment from a resettlement agency in the U.S., a move that could revive the flow of refugee admissions this year. In its appeal to the High Court, the Justice Department argues that Watson's interpretation empties the court's decision of meaning, because it includes not just close family members, but virtually all family members. Treating all of these relationships as close familial relationships, reads the term close out of the court's decision. Earlier Friday, Attorney General Jeff Sessions promised that the administration would directly appeal Watson's ruling. The Supreme Court on Saturday morning filed a motion calling for the Hawaii court to respond to the Trump administration's request by noon on Tuesday. The decision was a victory for opponents of the travel ban, who hope to broaden the universe of people who could bypass the president's policy, which temporarily bars travelers from 6 majority Muslim nations and suspends the refugee resettlement program. The ruling prompted a rebuke from Sessions, who released a statement Friday afternoon accusing the district court of issuing decisions that are entrusted to the executive branch, undermined national security, delayed necessary action, created confusion, and violated a proper respect for separation of powers. By this decision, the district court has improperly substituted its policy preferences for the national security judgments of the executive branch in a time of grave threats, defying both the lawful prerogatives of the executive branch and the directive of the Supreme Court, Sessions said. Sessions said the Justice Department intends to return to the Supreme Court to overturn the district court's interpretation. The Supreme Court issued an order on June 26 that allowed the embattled measure to go into effect, but included the caveat that affected travelers with bona fide ties to a person or entity in the U.S. should not be subject to the ban. While the High Court offered some guidance, it didn't specifically list the categories of people or entities who might qualify as bona fide. When the Trump administration implemented the policy with a narrow definition that excluded grandparents and grandchildren, among others, advocates moved to take legal action. In the realm of refugee resettlement, the administration stood by the contention that a connection to a resettlement agency alone would not meet the criteria to avoid the ban. Judge Watson disagreed with those interpretations, however, and said the government's guidance contradicted the Supreme Court's order. Common sense, for instance, dictates that close family members be defined to include grandparents, he wrote. Indeed, grandparents are the epitome of close family members. The government's definition excludes them. That simply cannot be. The federal judge added that a refugee with a commitment from a resettlement agency met the standard for a bona fide relationship spelled out in the Supreme Court order. It is formal, it is a documented contract, it is binding, it triggers responsibilities and obligations, including compensation. It is issued specific to an individual refugee only when that refugee has been approved for entry by the Department of Homeland Security, and it is issued in the ordinary course, and historically has been for decades, he wrote. Bona fide does not get any more bona fide than that. On Twitter, an attorney for the plaintiffs, the state of Hawaii and a local imam, celebrated the momentary legal win, which could be met with appeals by the federal government. Sweeping victory in Hawaii's Trump just now, wrote Neil Cahill, going on to quote the order. Court, the government's definition represents the antithesis of common sense. A State Department spokesperson said Friday morning that officials were reviewing the decision and will be in consultation with the Justice Department to ensure immediate implementation. 45 After Dark Heavy Pushback Edition. When it came to the pushback on Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with a Russian attorney, his brother-in-law, and fellow meeting participant, led the way. Jared Kushner has been pressing other White House aides to more vigorously defend the meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and a Kremlin-linked lawyer that Kushner also attended, Politico's Tara Palmieri reports, but has faced resistance from some of Trump's top press aides, according to 6 sources familiar with the matter. The pushback on strategy has largely been a division between press aides, led by White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer, who think pushback should be largely left to outside counsel. But, as Palmieri notes, it's one part of the larger Russia issue and illustrates the White House's ongoing struggle to cope with a quickly evolving scandal that has engulfed Trump's early presidency. Trump himself jetted to France on Thursday and defended his son's behavior during a joint press appearance with French President Emmanuel Macron. Most people, Trump said, would have taken the meeting his son did, even as many experienced political operatives and observers said that wasn't the case. Elsewhere in President Trump's orbit, ILL Health, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell unveiled a revised healthcare bill on Thursday, but it still has an array of problems for moderates in particular, and it's not clear he will have the votes to pass it. Gushing him around, Democrats are increasingly training their fire on Jared Kushner after days of revelations about his meeting a Russian attorney. OFFN on relationship, President Trump personally toggled part of a long, off-the-record session with reporters on Air Force One into an on-the-record session. Budget woe. The CBO says that President Trump's proposed budget will not add to economic growth or eliminate deficits. Washington Post, by Jim? The Associated Press reports on President Trump's friend Jim, a guy who happens to fulfill a number of his campaign talking points but who may or may not exist. Excuse-moi, President Trump called French First Lady Brigitte Macron beautiful and said you're in such good shape. There you have it. You're caught up on the Trump administration. Jim.